So that is where like mindfulness is really incorporates all of that, where they stay connected to themselves and their needs. And then we're bringing in the sciencey stuff to make that plan more effective.
If you want to learn how you can live better with PMDD, this podcast was created for you. This is Mindfulness for PMDD with Diane. I'm Diane, and I'm a registered dietitian and lactation consultant. I'm also a mom, a PMDD warrior, and a trauma-informed mindfulness teacher. And this is where I discuss topics related to PMDD through the lens of mindfulness and meditation, and where I share all about how mindfulness has gotten me to a place of greater peace and acceptance with my PMDD. I also chat with people who have helped and inspired me along the way, so they can share their wisdom with you too. So let's get started. This podcast is not a substitute for psychological therapy or medical advice. Please take care when listening to this podcast, as some may find certain words or subjects triggering or difficult to hear. Take only what serves you and leave the rest behind. Welcome, friends. In this episode, I chat with someone who I have so much respect for and who I am just in awe of. Mandy Rother is a functional dietitian who specializes in a holistic approach to PMDD. She combines 15 years of professional experience with her lived experience of PMDD to guide her comprehensive, data-driven approach. She specializes in using blood work and functional lab testing so that we can stop guessing and take strategic steps towards sustainable relief. Her mission is to provide trauma-informed, compassionate coaching so that her clients can take empowered steps forward with hope and confidence and reclaim their lives. When I first reached out to Mandy, I had gotten to a place in my PMDD where I felt like I had plenty of tools that were helping me with my psychological symptoms, but that weren't helping as much with some persistent physical symptoms. And my doctors didn't feel they had much more they could offer me. As a dietitian myself, I wondered if perhaps a dietitian could help me work through some of that. And I was so pleased to find that Mandy is a functional nutrition specialist and a mom and a PMDD warrior herself. I want to read a little bit of a testimonial that I wrote for Mandy because it illustrates the impact that working with her had on me. So here it is. In order to keep my head above water and keep my life from imploding, I had to make my life very small. Every month for 2 entire weeks at a time, I experienced a wide range of severe symptoms that affected both my physical and mental health. I could no longer be myself. I had thrown absolutely everything I could think of at this problem. Then I found Mandy. Mandy is not only a dietitian specializing in integrative and functional nutrition, she's also a mom living with PMDD. I felt Mandy was able to empathize, understand what I was going through, and offer a truly holistic assessment and plan designed to help me tackle the areas that were the most problematic for me. Whenever I found challenges in actually implementing one of our plans, Mandy always had excellent tips for how to make our plan work within the context of my real life. I've experienced a 98% decrease in symptoms after 3 months of working together. I'm able to have more fun with my son and my husband. Working with Mandy provided the most dramatic positive results of any healthcare provider I have worked with. It was everything to me. I respect and value her work. Yeah, all true. I will give a little disclaimer and say that I don't consistently live at that place of 98% reduction of symptoms. I definitely have months that are worse than others, sometimes way worse. That's definitely where mindfulness comes in to help me accept the challenges of my life with PMDD and be kind to myself and still find a way to move forward in a life that I can feel good about. Having said that, before working with Mandy, I reached a point where I was stuck in bed or otherwise just stuck at home quite a lot with really severe physical and cognitive symptoms of PMDD. I had cut back on work, and I would drop off my son at preschool and basically just try to accomplish 3 things each day: make the beds, do one task related to laundry, and empty the dishwasher. Because the domino effect of those 3 tasks, if I could get through all of them, helped the house stay pretty tidy and also got me out of bed and moving around. Mandy helped me to discover root causes and triggers for a lot of my symptoms, so that after a few months of working with her, I was able to begin engaging with my life again and being more active. I was shocked and blown away by how much of what I had been experiencing was drastically improved. I also was really surprised to find that so much of what Mandy does with her clients, both one-to-one and in her group program, PMDD Revealed, incorporates mindfulness, meditation, and mindset work. In this episode, Mandy and I discuss the difference between mindful eating and intuitive eating and their relationship to both the nervous system and PMDD, understanding cravings and appetite changes in the luteal phase and how to mindfully navigate that, what cycle syncing is and where you can get started with cycle syncing, and how Mandy offers her clients a holistic approach to PMDD management by combining data and scientific evidence with mindfulness and intuition. So, please enjoy my chat with Mandy Rother. Hi, Mandy. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. So glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. I'm so excited. I think I'm really excited because we get to chat today in a way that's slightly different how we normally do, right? Because we know each other from me being a client of yours. We've worked together on many nutrition-related topics with, related to my PMDD. But now today I get to kind of pick your brain and go a little deeper into some of the mindfulness-related stuff that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, it's like we've come full circle. Like somehow I knew you would end up doing something like this. Like I'm just so proud of you and like where you're at and how far you've come, like not just with your symptoms, but just really attuning to yourself and like your purpose. And like, look at you here with this podcast. It's so fun to see this launch.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Honestly, I could not have been here without your help and your support. Like there's a few key people and resources that have been so huge along the way for me in terms of getting to a really stable place with my PMDD. And for sure you're one of them. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been an honor. That's like my purpose is I call it the ripple effect of like, my purpose is helping people stabilize so they can fulfill their purpose. And like, look at you, what you're doing and like the ripple effect. And I've seen it with so many other clients and yeah, it's so cool to see.
All right. I'm so excited. Let's get into it. So I was mentioning to you before our call that when I am doing this podcast myself, I like to mention what day I'm on and kind of how I'm feeling related to that. And I thought that would be fun for us to do today because we are both PMDDers and we can kind of compare notes today. Mm-hmm. So today, as we record this, I'm day 21.
Oh.
Today, I actually feel pretty good. But I have to say, most of the past week, I have been lethargy and brain fog. Surprisingly, my mood has been really good.
Oh,
but
good.
Yeah, it's very shocking. And it's interesting to feel the extremes. I definitely feel like, my symptoms are in these 3 buckets, like physical, cognitive, and emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always interesting to see each luteal phase, like how much I'm experiencing in each area.
Yep.
So I felt very useless some of the last few days, but I actually took it as a really good thing that my mood was in a good place.
Were you able to rest? Like, were you able to follow that need and rest? Awesome.
Yes, like especially on the weekend days, I just leaned into it and let myself just give myself what I needed. And honestly, I think that's why I feel okay today, was because I really just let myself go with it. So, okay, where are you today?
I am day 1, kind of day 2. I started bleeding yesterday afternoon.
Okay.
And I had this, every luteal phase is always a bit different. And, for me, a few days before my period, I feel this like letting go. Like, we're actually preparing for our dog to have a litter of puppies. So much to do.
Oh my
And
goodness.
we had committed of like, okay, we're going to do all this cooking and cleaning, but like, to get ready for, and we, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know me, we have 2-year-old twins and a 7-year-old and 2 dogs, and like our house is chaos. So, but I just was like, you know what? Whatever. And I took naps while my kids were napping, and I felt this lift of energy yesterday after my bleed started. And it wasn't even fatigue, this weekend. It was more like the world felt like too much. I get kind of like sensory sensitivity. So I just like wanted to be in my bed with a book and, take a break from the world. Yes. But I got this burst of energy, and I sent my husband to soccer with all the kids, and I went for a bike ride. And I haven't been biking by myself without like towing kids behind me for a long time, and it felt really good and freeing. And so it was kind of this balance of like lots of indulgent rest, and then all of a sudden I was like, I want to move.
Yes.
and I enjoyed some time outside biking.
That's so good. Do you find that you often start to feel that good that early in the cycle? Like that quickly after the bleed starts?
For me, my actual bleed is fairly easy. Like I don't get a lot of the physical cramping or like physical symptoms anymore. It's more of like an internal shift and like deeper spiritual need of like, so it's not so much about physical energy for me, but it's like, I want a lot of space of just time to be in my own head, think, reflect, not having to like talk a lot. And it's interesting, like being on a podcast, like talking so publicly on day 1, I'm like, oh, what would I be doing if I weren't doing this? And knowing that like, this is something I love to do, but it takes energy. I spent some time, like sitting on my floor this morning and like journaling a little bit, like reflecting on my last cycle. And what was coming up for me is like this need to like simplify some of my routines and thinking about ways that there can be less in my brain that I have to remember that's just like automated in my life. And so that's what I was just doing, some journaling and reflecting this morning and getting some of that alone time.
Oh my God. You're already giving us so much good wisdom and good gems. No, because I love that you said that you're coming into this aware that your needs are different right now. And so you took the time to give yourself some quiet time, some reflection. I just love that, that you're kind of like, okay, I'm going to do this, but also let's prepare myself and give myself what I need.
Yeah. So I think, sometimes I find my body just needs like a little bit of a reset. Like whether that's in between clients or after doing something that like, and I'm an introvert by nature. So if I'm presenting, like I could present to a group of hundreds of people and feel okay, but I'm going to need some extra tending to after. Like after we wrap up, I have a meeting with my assistant, but I'm probably going to like take the first part of the meeting outside, get some fresh air, like put my feet in the grass, refill my tea. And it's just about that. And that's what mindfulness is, right? This gentle noticing. And my group they'll, share that, like I'm always saying early and often of like, how can we notice these needs all the time, be tending to them all the time until essentially, rather than waiting until shit hits the fan, so to speak.
And when we are able to do that, what I find is then it is easier to do these really tiny little things that can kind of fit anywhere into your day. And I feel my experience anyway is like you get a bigger impact on those smaller things.
Yeah.
If you're able to kind of take that time more regularly to tune in with yourself.
Yeah, I call them micro moments. I think with PMDD, and it might be as a perfectionist, I attract perfectionists. And then we have PMDD, I feel like there's a trend of perfectionism. And so I think that like idea of like the tiny, tiny things and how that builds up to make such a difference is so key, because that way it doesn't, especially when you're feeling really symptomatic, if you were to think about like, oh my gosh, I want to do a 30-minute meditation to help myself or some big mindfulness practice, like likely in that symptomatic moment, you're going to be like, no, I can't do that. I'm not capable of that. So really bringing it down to that like tiny micro step is calming to the brain and your nervous system. Like, hey, she's paying attention to me. She's doing something here to help.
Yes, 100%. All right, Mandy, I love this because we're already diving way into the mindfulness. But let's back up a second, because for the listener, I would love it if you could share a little bit about yourself in terms of what you do, but also what got you here.
Yeah. And so as I was sharing, like my mission, my purpose is really to help people kind of access that level of stability and vitality where they can fulfill their purpose. And specifically, I specialize in PMDD. I also see a lot of PME, so premenstrual exacerbation, where someone doesn't just have PMDD, they have anxiety and depression, or PCOS or IBS or other health concerns. And we're looking at, from a functional medicine lens, how does it all connect? And so I always like to share, I'm the most stubborn practitioner out there. And so I tend to find people, or people find me rather, that have tried a lot of different things that have not worked, even people that have seen multiple naturopaths or even tried the holistic perspective. And what I like to do, and where I get really stubborn, is, okay, did we really get to the root of it? And how do we connect the dots between someone's cyclical experience and their PMDD symptoms and what's underneath? Because until we get to what's underneath, we're always going to be playing the Band-Aid game. And so I'm a dietitian by training, and I have extensive functional medicine training. And so that is a big part of what I do. And then I love to weave in, which we'll talk about today, other mindfulness connection components, nervous system components, because we're whole people. We have to address everything all together. So my goal was to create a program that offered everything I needed, or everything I would have wanted, when I was struggling with severe PMDD symptoms. And as someone may have guessed already, like I've, had very, very severe periods of time where my symptoms were debilitating, like rock bottom, had to take medical leave. And mine was kind of that mixed soup I was talking about, where it was, PMDD, more accurately, probably the PME with depression and anxiety. And then, some other hormonal issues. I got diagnosed with PCOS and had digestive issues and all this thing, mixed kind of combo. And for me, through that journey, I just realized time and time again how essential it is to weave together all these components. And it can be complex and feel complex, and, someone needs that guidance. But I also like to emphasize that it can also be simple. Each step can feel simple and doable. It just can be hard to piece it all together by yourself. So that's what I do and why I do it.
Absolutely. I think a lot of what you mentioned is kind of how I came to you, feeling, as you mentioned, like I had sort of exhausted all the things I could do, all the various healthcare practitioners or resources or self-management tools and techniques. And two was, yes, I also felt like, well, maybe there's some other stuff going on here, digestive things and stuff, but it all felt so tangled up together. Yeah. And I sort of didn't know how to approach teasing these things apart. And I'm a dietitian, right? I'm not a functional medicine nutrition, but I'm a dietitian, and I felt really overwhelmed. And so I reached out to you and was so excited to find not only a dietitian who worked with people with PMDD, but also had PMDD. And then I was also really excited to learn over time how much kind of mindfulness you incorporate in your work, because that has also been such a huge part of my journey. So I wanted to ask you, about something that we started covering in our early days of work together, which was mindful eating and intuitive eating. And I was wondering if you could chat a little bit about how you see the relationship between mindful eating and intuitive eating and PMDD, and looking at it from this functional nutrition perspective, and things like the nervous system and stuff.
Yeah, it's like a little web of connections,
Yes.
right? And I think for anyone listening, let's first explore like what it is and the difference between the two, because often they're used interchangeably. And so think of mindful eating as paying attention on purpose to the present moment, and then that specifically applied to food, where you're experiencing eating, you're paying attention in that moment without judgment, or noticing the judgments that come up, because they're always there.
Right.
Noticing the judgments that come up and, just observing and letting them be there. And, some people will think about things like minimizing distractions while eating, being very present moment, and then like engaging the senses and the experience of the food and savoring that food, chewing really thoroughly, those sorts of things. And so these are great practices and a great place to start, and it can increase the enjoyment of food, help with digestion, things like that. But sometimes it's not enough when we're looking at the food relationship. And so if we look at intuitive eating, anyone can Google, the 10 principles of intuitive eating. So this really refers to, think of it like a broader philosophy that like rejects the diet mentality and then focuses on eating for that like physical nourishment rather than emotional coping, which we'll come back to, the emotional eating part, while trusting your body and relying on hunger and fullness cues. So this might look like, see you later diet culture. And now let me honor myself and my body, nourish my body without restriction. And what I'm seeing out there is there's so much information on social media and otherwise about mindful and intuitive eating. And it is such an important tool, but sometimes I see those principles being taken and used as a weapon rather than a tool. It becomes kind of like, for some people, again, bringing back in the perfectionism piece, it can become kind of a measuring stick where people feel like, oh, this sounds so simple in theory, but now I'm doing it wrong. Okay. And so I'm often asked the question of like, how, intuitive eating sounds great, but like, how can I trust my intuition? Like when I've been so out of control with food, or binging episodes, or patterns of restriction in the past, or even if someone has had a diagnosed eating disorder, they feel very disconnected with their body, and it can feel hard and scary to just like leap and trust their intuition. Yes. So I think we should talk about that a little bit, because that's common, and I don't think enough people are talking about that.
Yes. So how do you start down that path with someone, with a client? So, and I think that relates to how mindfulness and meditation sometimes can be really scary or uncomfortable for someone, particularly if they've experienced some trauma. It can be really uncomfortable to sit with what it is you're feeling and experiencing, and also sometimes the experience can be, well, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to trust. I don't know where to go from here. So can you talk about that more?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it helps to think of like the backstory first of how someone may have arrived in this place where they feel like, I'm sure my body is sending me signals, but I either don't hear them, I don't know how to listen to them. And if you, think for listeners to think about like a child in their life, when you look at children and how they eat, like they know when they're full, they know when they're hungry, and they're going to tell you, and there's no guilt or shame about it. Yeah. And oftentimes, if you think about, sometimes we can push children of like, finish your plate and just one more bite. It's like we gradually coach them out of that unknowingly, unconsciously. Yes. And then, as we grow into adults, we're bombarded by societal messages about how we should eat, how we should look. And even, you look at any influencers out there of like, having more motivation, more willpower, more control around food, right? That's like, presented as what we should be doing. And so it can just add to that shame pile. And then we look at, there's different things in someone's upbringing where either food was used as a reward or as a punishment, or, healthy eating behaviors and a healthy food relationship wasn't modeled to someone. It can get really, really muddy. And so I think understanding that and having that awareness helps to strip away some of that shame of like, oh, it makes sense why my relationship with food is really challenging.
Yes.
And so I started teaching a concept that I called evolved intuitive eating. And what I mean by that is we need to look at what's happening, not just with the psychology of it, but the physiology, what's happening internally in someone's body. Because if that is a mess, right? If someone has unstable blood sugar, that's, blood sugar roller coaster all day. If they have insufficient nutrient levels, if they have imbalanced brain chemistry, which is exactly the shifts that we'll talk about that happens with PMDD, it can feel hard or like an uphill battle to trust the signals that your body is sending. So we have to take care of the physical part as well as looking at how we're using food to cope with emotions and the, more traditional intuitive eating strategies. And when we do both of those things together, and I see it happen with, I would say, almost every single client, where they learn to trust their body, and trusting their body feels easy because we have that physical stability at the root of it too.
Yes. I want to come back. You said something about kind of understanding why this is happening, where this is coming from, right? And that reminds me of something that my coach said in our interview together, Nikita Williams. I forget what we were talking about, but she said, ask yourself, why is this normal? Why is this normal? And so it sounds like you're saying a similar thing. Like, if first we can understand that actually this is completely normal, and there's a whole reasoning behind it, that is almost the first step to kind of taking away some of that associated shame and some of those difficult feelings. I feel like this relates to my next question to you. So if it's okay with you, I want to talk about like cravings and appetite changes and stuff.
Yeah.
Because that similarly can be just like a real mess in the mind to have to confront. Right. And it may be something that you're dealing with all the time, or that gets worse or comes up in the luteal phase. But either way, I feel like that's a thing that has a normal reason for it. There's a reason that's happening.
Yeah.
But we attach a lot of shame, maybe try to kind of put some of that pressure on ourselves and that perfectionism. So one, I feel like that must be really common. So I wonder if you come across that a lot with clients, but also two, can you speak a little bit to like how you do work with clients on that? The idea of cravings and appetite changes and things.
Yeah, let's dig into that, because I think, we can look at first why it's happening and normalize it. And I think when you understand the why, that leads to the what to do. Right. And even I want to just emphasize a point that you made that I think is so important before we dive into the other stuff, is sometimes it is the meaning we make of it or that we attach to it. And I like to share with my group of like, for me, I love French fries. If someone were to tell me like, oh, you're craving French fries, that means, you shouldn't do that during your cycle. Like never do. I'd be like, no, I'm going to eat my French fries.
Yeah.
The difference is that like, let's say if I want to eat French fries during my luteal phase or any other part of my cycle, having them and making that a conscious, intentional choice and really enjoying it, and then it's done, it happened, no big deal, is very, very different. And the stress that it places on us and the emotional toll, if I had the French fries and then that led to a spiral of, self-deprecation and beating myself up about it, or the spiral of how it could impact other food behaviors for the rest of the day, rest of the week, etc. And so sometimes it is just allowing that flexibility and releasing the need for perfection. Most people, it can have beautiful, amazing menstrual cycles with like a B+ diet, meaning 80% of the time they're eating whole foods that nourish them. And then the other 20%, in my case is like, French fries and chocolate and some of those more indulgent things. Yeah. And so I think with the cravings, it is normal. It's just, think of it like a volume dial. Like, is it way turned up where those cravings feel like they're controlling you, they're all consuming? That is typically something that we want to look at the physiological undercurrent of and start to address, and then the emotional connection to it too. If it's like a slight desire or in the mood for a food, I think that is where we want to normalize it and as part of the cycle. So what happens is hormones fluctuate throughout the menstrual cycle, and those changes impact our brain chemistry and our appetite and even our caloric needs. Our calorie needs actually go up a little bit during the luteal phase, that week or two before the cycle.
Okay.
And so during the first half of the cycle, for anyone unfamiliar, it's called the follicular phase. So let's just call it the first half. Cravings are typically lower during that time because we're more sensitive to insulin to manage our blood sugar, and we're more efficiently processing carbohydrates. And so typically it's easier to stabilize blood sugar, and that leads to fewer cravings. Now, this might be different for everyone, especially if I see this a lot in someone who's like over exercising, lots of high intensity workouts without adequate nourishment. Maybe they're restricting carbs or unintentionally reducing carbs too much during, certain parts of the cycle. Yeah. And then during the second half of the cycle, the luteal phase, the shift in hormones kind of revs up our metabolism and our appetite. And when the hormones dip, especially estrogen, we're less sensitive to insulin, and it becomes a little bit harder to regulate blood sugar. And when estrogen goes down, so does serotonin. So that's like our calm, content, feel-good brain chemical. And when that's low, not only is our mood dysregulated, our sleep can be dysregulated, but we can have more cravings for carbohydrates. So this is just like extra pronounced with PMDD because of what causes PMDD, with like the shifts in serotonin and GABA and such in the brain. Right. And I made a note of a statistic to share just for people to understand how common this is. So it's these appetite and eating like behaviors are well documented in PMDD. And there's over a 16% comorbidity with eating disorders in PMDD compared to only like a 2.3% in the general population. That's a huge difference.
Yes.
And I was looking up research on this a few months ago, and this is especially prevalent with people with personality signs of harm avoidance. So harm avoidance looks like a ton of self-criticism, lots of self-doubt, trouble saying no to others or setting boundaries with others, sometimes conflict avoidance. Mm-hmm. And anyone listening might be like, yep, that's me. That can be very, very common. And this makes sense because it's deeply painful to be overcome with self-doubt and worry and those feelings towards ourselves. It makes sense that our brain would want to find like an alternate route, like to hide away or avoid those negative feelings. And for some people, that happens with food.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Wow. So many things to think about. And we can shift to like, okay, what do we do? But any questions on that or thoughts on that?
Well, I want to thank you firstly for kind of just pointing out the difference between, yes, there's a reason this is happening, an underlying cause, and normal. Yeah. Because I had said the word normal, but like, there's even just looking at a particular craving, it might be normal, but it might bleed over into something where there's something more extreme happening, or more beyond like a normal level of craving changes, appetite changes that could probably be addressed to change that. Mm-hmm. But oh my gosh, I didn't realize you mentioned the statistic about the comorbidity of PMDD and eating disorders. And that is just huge, which makes sense or makes me even more, grateful that you do so much of like this. Tell me if this is the right word or not to use, but I kind of think of it as like a very holistic work that you do, because it's like you really can't look at one without the other. You really can't like look just at what's happening physiologically and not consider all these other elements of things that are happening with us, emotionally and mentally. Okay, so I want to ask you about cycle syncing. because
sorry to interrupt. Do we want to talk about the nervous system connection? I realized I skipped over that totally. Should we dive into that first?
Wait, with just in general, with kind of like...
With the mindful and intuitive eating.
Right. Okay. Yes. Go ahead, please.
So I like made a mental note. I'm like, we got to come back to that. So,
good. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Now I'm like, oh, where was my train of thought? So, we're talking about like what causes this, right? And it can lead to these patterns of emotional eating and what happens. Yeah. And if anyone wants to dig into this, I have an ebook on my website for free, like all on this topic so people can download. But what can happen if we think about those neural circuits, it's like our brain learns, hey, I'm feeling stressed, angry, depressed, sad, whatever. I eat this thing and then I feel better. Yes. It doesn't remember how long that lasted or how you felt after.
Right.
And when this happens over and over again, it's like we keep, fortifying that neural circuit of like, okay, this food makes me feel better. And that is why it can be hard to break that vicious cycle. And so the first step really is that awareness and acceptance, understanding the science of it, like we've been talking about, can be very validating. And then I really encourage people to explore, like, what is the need underneath? What is the need underneath that emotion? And what can we notice somatically? And what that means is like, what do we feel in our body? Even outside of the thoughts that may be a jumbled mess inside the mind, what is your body experiencing? And that can start to signal us of like, what's happening in the nervous system. And think of the nervous system as like a surveillance system with like way too many cameras. It's like people with PMDD, let's say if the average person has like 5 surveillance cameras with PMDD, especially during the luteal phase, you might have like 50. Yes. So we are more hypervigilant, looking for threat, looking for signs of danger. And so when we start to feel that emotion popping up, which the emotion in and of itself can feel dangerous and unsafe, especially there can be almost a degree of trauma with PMDD, of experiencing such severe symptoms month over month. And so really pausing to tune in of like, what's happening in my body? What sensations are there? And that can start to tune us into that nervous system need. And like we were talking about when we opened the call, that looks like these tiny micro steps of noticing, tending to, and meeting those needs. Our body learns like, hey, I can trust her. She's got my back. And it's like a sigh of relief really for our nervous system when we are following up with, okay, my body is telling me I need a break from, this conversation I'm in right now, or I need to step away and go step outside, or whatever that small action step is. When people learn to follow that early and often, like we were talking about, sometimes things don't mount up as much where it can end up with, some of these, emotional eating symptoms or other ways of coping.
Yes. Okay. Can I try to like summarize that to make sure I got that?
I know.
Because I feel like there's like 2 parts. So you mentioned how when we look to a particular food to soothe a particular emotion, we begin to lay down these neural pathways where, and especially once we start doing it over and over, we're laying down this neural pathway and we're telling the brain that this is making us feel better, even though in the long term, or maybe just even just a little bit after that meal or snack, we're not feeling so good.
Yeah.
It remembers that immediate kind of reward.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, in PMDD, we tend to, there's so many things. 1, many of us come into PMDD with trauma, but 2, PMDD makes us very hypervigilant. And just the experience of going through PMDD month to month can feel very traumatizing.
Yeah.
So now, if we aren't able to find a way to take a pause and listen to what we need, why we're grabbing that bag of chips or whatever it is, for me, it was always chips. That can lead to a pattern of our brain just immediately wanting to reach for that to soothe what we're feeling. And if we can sort of break that cycle, that pattern, by taking those little moments early and often, whenever we can, to check in with ourselves. What are we feeling? What am I needing right now that's causing this feeling or this desire for whatever this snack is, we can break that pattern. Otherwise, that's how it kind of becomes like an autopilot thing that we go to each time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I often see happen is someone will recognize, hey, this is a problem. I'm emotionally eating or binging or whatever it may be. And their first step is often, well, I got to stop doing that. I got to stop reaching for the chips or whatever it may be. And I would argue that the first step is actually different. It's learning your body's needs and starting to build your toolbox of what does my body need and what works for me. So then you feel safe to try other things. If you just like take away your only coping mechanism, that's kind of scary. And so oftentimes we need to start in a slower, more gentle fashion versus just like thrusting ourselves and trying to white knuckle through it. That is really stressful. And then we can feel horrible if we fail and it doesn't like work. And so I think that's the biggest thing I see, that we actually need to start in a little bit of a different place to build up that self-knowing and that toolbox.
Yes, you're totally right. Preparing ourselves first, getting to the root of the problem and setting ourselves up to have other things that we can reach to, rather than just trying to kind of pull this away from ourselves. And now what? Now we feel kind of lost and threatened again.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to bring up cycle syncing because you talk about cycle syncing. For me, cycle syncing is something that I initially was like, I don't know why I felt like resistance toward it. Even when I found it to be interesting or fascinating, I like couldn't lean into it in my own life. And at some point I did, and now I'm hooked. And I want to cycle sync everything. I love cycle syncing.
Yes.
So can you talk about that a little bit? And also, maybe not everyone knows what cycle syncing is. So maybe can we get into that a little bit?
Yeah. And so cycle syncing can refer to a lot of things. Like some people are syncing with their different phases of their menstrual cycle, different lifestyle aspects. Like I'm going to flow with my cycle, with my self-care, my style of work and work productivity, nutrition, fitness, supplements, etc. And I have an idea, if I may offer, of why you were resistant to it in the beginning.
Yes.
And this is why I actually don't talk about it in the way that we're going to talk about it until like phase 3 of my program. Because when you're feeling really, really unstable and you're having severe symptoms, like you're not going to care if like your workout is like conducive to your phase. Like nobody cares about that or should care about that at the beginning. It's too much. It's too much to think about. And so, and I also think like if you were to look at online of like cycle syncing, nutrition and fitness, like there's tons of charts and tons of information. Again, when you're in survival mode, it's too much. It's not the place to start. That doesn't mean that we're ignoring cyclical needs, but we need to start in a different place. And so, and if we zoom out, you know, and think about like, we are all cyclical beings, PMDD or not. We have cyclical needs. It's just, I feel like PMDD, when those cyclical needs are ignored, it's like comes out with a slap on the face. Like, hey, you got to pay attention to this. Oftentimes people with PMDD symptoms tend to be like highly sensitive individuals, sometimes highly empathic. And so we notice those shifts in a more intense, significant way. And I would say that that also comes with some pretty cool gifts of being the type of person who is highly sensitive. And we can get into that. But so with all this buzz, it's like crowd out the noise or whatever you're reading on social media. And I would say start in a slightly different place. And that really is like the first step is like being okay with not following the generic charts in the beginning of, you know, and really starting with, as simple as it sounds, accepting your cycle for where it is now, symptoms and all, knowing that your cycle is offering you information, it's offering you data that you can then decode to really uncover your physical and emotional needs. And then naturally the next step is tracking in whatever way works for you. Oftentimes simpler is better, you know, a notebook, a cycle journal, like physical kind of journal or an app or whatever that looks like. and then not just zooming in on the symptoms, but tracking other things. If we hyper focus on symptoms and what's going wrong, we miss the gold mine of information that can help us really begin a truly intuitive cycle syncing process of what those needs are. You know, for example, yesterday was my first day of the bleed, and I shared I went for a long bike ride. You know, if I just look at the charts, I would have said, oh, I should have only napped and not went on my bike ride. But my body was like, you want to be outside, you want to move.
Yes.
And so, you know, in one of my favorite books, Wild Power, they talk about the big red rule. And that is essentially that there are no rules. And this is where the nature of mindfulness and the intuitive nature of cycle syncing really need to be protected first. And so learning and using those charts is really helpful. And I teach on that in my program and in workshops and such. But we have to start with knowing yourself first. So then you can take the pieces of that that are important to you and apply to you and actually are going to work without causing stress on your system.
Yeah. I think I really love one of the first things you said. I think it's so huge, which is the first place to start is actually really simply, although it might feel really tough, just accepting your cycle for what it is and the changes you are going to experience as you go through the cycle. That is so huge. I think you're so right. I think that is the first step before anything else. And then just starting to observe.
Yeah.
Right? Just starting to collect that information without judgment, without giving ourselves a hard time. Right? Just collecting it as you say, as data for how we can then move forward to work with our cycle rather than against it.
Exactly.
But I really, really, really love that you said start there. Just kind of like with the first step of just accepting the cycle for what it is.
And often in the next question people will ask, so if someone has taken the step of learning about their cycle, their cyclical needs, they naturally be like, okay, so how the heck am I supposed to do this in my real life? You know, and this makes sense, right? Again, if we normalize how hard this is, you know, we live in a linear world that expects us to be the same every day. We're expected to show up to work with the same capacity and productivity and energy and brain power. We could like add a feminist lens to this and talk more about that, but it kind of goes without saying that, you know, the world, and especially in American society, and I would argue globally, is not set up to honor this more like feminine rhythm for people with menstrual cycles where we are different. And this can happen in partnerships too, where I know I feel like I had to train my husband, Ivan, of like, hey, I'm different. I have different, you know, fluctuating levels of energy where I'm going to be more or less involved in housework. My libido and sexual desires not going to be the same day in, day out. And this is nothing against men, like, but they're kind of the same every day where, you know, they don't have these hormonal fluctuations that we do. Oh, we lose our connection.
I lost you for a second. I heard you say men, and so if we could just go back. I think you were explaining how they're kind of, their rhythm's different from ours.
Yeah. Like, you know, it is where it's like we have to learn it ourselves so then we can share with them, hey, I'm different. You know, these different phases. Here are my different needs. It's almost like coaching them and really advocating for your needs. And even for parents listening, sometimes we feel or have this expectation that we should be like super mom all the time, every day, every week, every month of the year, where how you are, you know, parenting your children might look a little bit different. There's sometimes where it might feel easier than others. And so really knowing, okay, it makes sense that this is hard. And now that I know my needs, is thinking of really practical ways to start advocating for that.
Yes.
And really being grounded in, I need this, and that's okay that I need this. Because oftentimes when it can feel like the world's kind of against us when we start trying to do some of those self-care practices.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not easy to do in the within the structure of the world we live in, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
Mandy, I am mindful of the time, but I really want to give you a chance to talk about like why you offer the things you offer and,
Yeah.
you know, your unique kind of offering, because I, you know, aside from the things we've talked about, you offer things that maybe someone wouldn't expect in your group program, which I also did, called PMDD Revealed.
Yeah.
Things like some yoga and meditation and exercise resources and all these different things. As I mentioned, it's been so lovely working with you because it feels very holistic. And I know that, you know, that's very intentional. And also there's probably some other things I'm not even considering in that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we are whole beings. And so I wanted my program to encompass the whole person. And like I said at the beginning of like everything I like wish I would have had or didn't know I needed at the time.
Right.
And, when I think about my PMDD journey, I feel like these like deeply painful moments have also led to me just collecting of like, okay, this is essential. This is essential. And with my program, I work with people in, it's a hybrid format where we have the beauty of group and a community and the solidarity of that, along with the deep personalization of the one-on-one work and a functional medicine approach. And so, because we're not all the same, what helped me get to the place that I'm at is not the exact path that helped you or my other clients. And so I always hold at the center that each person is unique and they have not only unique physiological root cause driving factors, but a unique system of values and life experiences and beliefs, et cetera, that we need to honor in the process. And so, a big part of what I do and why a lot of people come to me is I'm kind of a data junkie. I have extensive training and using functional lab assessments and blood work and, gut health testing, hormone testing, et cetera. And so that is a piece of it. But what I found is that when we combine that with these other factors of this intuitive way of cycle syncing, the intuitive movement and mindfulness, the nervous system toolbox that I help my clients build, then it's powerful beyond measure when we bring all those components together. And so, for me, there was just this deep calling to really help people to, stop having to take masking tape and duct tape and piece things together themselves, because that is super damn hard to do when someone's very symptomatic, to really create a path where people are guided step by step with a level of personalization. And so it's just something I feel super passionate about. And I think part of my role in the world is to help act as a bridge between a couple things: conventional medicine and holistic medicine. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, where people have the right to have a choice in their care and what's going to work for them. And sometimes that's a combined approach or bringing in the others or having other options when medications and birth control, et cetera, haven't worked. And the other is acting as a bridge between the objective hard data that we see in someone's lab test, along with bridging that with their self-knowing, their intuition and their needs. And so in that way, I'm just a conduit in providing my expertise to help people get there. But it's really, and I share with my clients all the time that my goal is to keep them in the driver's seat, because people feel safest in the driver's seat and they know themselves best. And so that is where like mindfulness is really incorporates all of that, where they stay connected to themselves and their needs. And then we're bringing in the sciencey stuff to make that plan more effective.
I love it so much. What you're doing is really so unique, for better or worse, right? Like, thank goodness you're out there, but it really is quite unique what you're doing. And I feel like we need more of it. It's just phenomenal what you're doing. I feel like we've just gotten to the tip of the iceberg today. I feel like we need to do this again, for sure, at some point. In the meanwhile, for anyone listening who wants to connect with you and learn more, possibly work with you, can you let everyone know how they can do that, where they can find you?
Yeah. And so I'm sure you'll link below the episode to my website and such, but I would love to just hear from people. Feel free to reach out on the contact form on my website. Like, tell me how this episode impacted you. That just like fills my cup and helps re-energize me to keep fighting the good fight. But, if anyone is interested in this type of work, I have, a button on my website to schedule a strategy session where we would meet, face to face over Zoom and really dive into someone's personal history, where their symptoms are at now, what they've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And that is the beginning to start to decode and untangle all this. And then for, free resources, I have a Moody and Menstrual newsletter, I call it, where I'm emailing clients, or not clients, but my email list most weeks, just kind of musings and reflections and science on PMDD and the menstrual cycle. And there's a free ebook on my website, and I'll be launching a free PMDD course soon in the nearest future as my capacity allows. So lots of different ways to connect, but the best way, hop on my email list. I intentionally don't spend a lot of time on social media. My nervous system doesn't like to be on social media every day. So jump on that email list and then reach out for a one-on-one session if you're feeling ready and called to dive deep.
Perfect. Yes, I will absolutely put your website in the show notes. I just tell you, I love the newsletter so much because, as I've told you, you really put a lot of yourself. You're just very open and honest and transparent in general, but in your newsletters in particular. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important in general, but in particular with dietitians, because I've often found as a dietitian that people kind of, I don't know, they think that we're kind of these perfectionists or this like this thing that you can't reach, like they kind of put us on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. So to have someone who's a dietitian who you can reach out to, who not only has PMDD, but also is just like showing you, I am a human being too, just like you. It's so helpful. It's so validating. And I think it helps even more everything that you're doing. Like it makes your impact so much bigger. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that's my goal, to be writing to thousands and thousands of people every single week. Eventually I'll have my own, podcast, I'm sure. But I think, yes, I had to press the pause button on myself because I'm like, I can't overwhelm myself and then I won't be helping anyone. But I'm just really on a mission to help people not feel so alone in this. I think that's the biggest thing where, for anyone listening, you are not alone. This is real. It's a real condition, but hope is possible. It's not a life sentence.
Oh, that was a beautiful, perfect ending.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mandy, for joining me today. Thank you. We will definitely be talking soon. Thank you. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For links to everything mentioned in this episode, you can check out the show notes. And you can find me, Diane DeJesus, on Instagram at Mindfulness for PMDD. Now, I invite you to pause, take a breath, and look around.